there.
Hi, how are you?
Good. How are you?
Good to see you.
Good to see you too. Can you hear me clearly and everything?
I totally can. My lighting is super wonky, but I think I'm stuck with it.
Mine too. I don't know how many times I do therapy on Zoom and do all sorts of things online, and yet I still can't seem to figure out lighting.
Me neither. We'll just have to, this is good enough.
Yes. So while people are joining and trickling in, I just wanted to thank you so much for coming. This book is such a treat to read for so many different reasons. The first is that you're just a phenomenal writer,
Oh,
which
thank you.
sure you are aware of, but your writing is just really charming and funny. And one of my favorite parts about it is that it almost reads like fiction, even though I know it's you being very real, very vulnerable. It's, both brutally honest, but also something that anyone could read and enjoy and see you as kind of a character in a story that they relate to. And I think that that's really refreshing because in this whole world of literature, and specifically nonfiction about mental health and therapy and stuff like that, it's so often from the perspective of the therapist, which is great.
Yeah.
There are some really, really, really terrific books out there, and we've been reading a lot of them in the book club, but it's really just a breath of fresh air. I see someone saying that she made her 93-year-old grandfather read your book, and he loved it.
Oh, that is so amazing. This is really wonderful to get these affirmations. And I've had people email me and say, how did you think of this story? Like they think it's a novel. And I'm
Yeah.
like, I have to think of it. I lived it, sweetie pie.
So I guess I have not even introduced you. Everyone here knows who you are, but this is Christie Tate. Are you practicing as an attorney still, or are you mainly focusing on writing?
Yeah, I let go of my law job for now in March of 2021. So I'm full-time writing now. So we'll see. We'll see how long I can sustain that.
Has that been a big transition?
Yes, huge, huge. I'm like, I keep saying my husband's busy all day long. He still works in a normal job, and people email him and call him. I'm like, no one's looking for me. No one cares. Do I this? Like for someone who's a little bit needy and neurotic, working alone as a writer is it's a little tricky. I may have to. I need to find. I've subscribed to a lot of like publications, so they'll send me emails just so I'll feel like I'm wanted.
That's awesome. So, I mean, I just want to start by asking not what made you think of this story, because it is the story of your life, but what made you decide that you wanted to write it?
You know, I had written a novel before I wrote Group, and it was about a young, lonely lawyer and her very twisted relationship with her therapist. And I like anybody's very first book.
Uh-oh, I can't hear you all of a sudden. I don't know. Oh, there you are. Sorry, you cut out for a second, but I think I can hear you now.
Um, I'd written this novel and it was terrible, and it was pretty clear that there was some story underneath that I was scared to tell. And I took a piece, like one of the scenes, I actually took it to Group, and it was super gross because it was a scene where I had the young protagonist named Christie, have sex with her therapist because I didn't know how to end. I didn't know
Yeah.
any of the fiction, and everyone was like, that is disgusting. Also, what are you doing? Because they're picturing me and Dr. Rosen because it was so thinly veiled. And Max actually turned to me and he said, would you please just write the true story? Just write the true story. And I thought, well, maybe I'll do that. And I thought what I would do is write the story of Group and learn the principles of writing and then go back to a novel. But I kind of got stuck in the nonfiction. Group took on a life of its own as a true story. And that's how it happens.
And what did the group think of it? How did they feel seeing you go from aspiring to write a novel to seeing this best-selling book that's in Reese Witherspoon's book club and is so acclaimed and well read, written about them?
Well, it is varied. I mean, there were different points in time when it was clear that the book was going to go out into the world with, Avid Reader Press, and it was a division of Simon and Schuster. Some group members felt like I had exploited them and I was going to get rich on their stories, which is something I understand why they were saying that. I didn't feel like I'd been super wounded. That's a reasonable thing for someone to say who sat next to me and now is a character in a book. It's super, super tricky. So we had to have a lot of discussions, because it takes forever for a book to come out. And then once it's out, that the discussions didn't stop. There were some people who had a reaction like, I don't want to read that. I sat next to you while you struggled. Why do I want to? It was painful to watch you, Christie, suffer. I don't want to read about it again. Also a fair response. And of course, we're in therapy, so we have to unpack everyone's feelings. And there was one member who told me the minute she caught wind that I was going to write any kind of true story, she said, don't write about me. Don't ever write about me. And I said, okay. And so she's not in the book. I know she contributed so much to my journey, but she had asked me very clearly, and she has a super sensitive job. And it was just easier to honor that. There's plenty of other characters. So each individual person in the group had their own relationship to the book and to me, and it would evolve over time. And then sometimes they'd be like, this is such a party. This is so fun. Also, would you shut up and talk about something else? So it ran the gamut.
Now, it's so interesting because reading, both as a consumer of books, but also as a psychologist myself, and someone who has led some groups or co-led some groups, throughout various points in my training. This is not what a typical group always looks like. And so I'm wondering if you could take a minute to anyone out there who read the book and thought, oh, I was curious about group therapy, but this sounds, not what I expected. Could you kind of explain from your perspective how this group is different from other groups, or what people who might feel like, oh, my privacy is completely gone if I went to group therapy, how to
Totally. Well, I always knew that Dr. Rosen was unorthodox or an iconoclast or a maverick in the field. I heard wind of that, and there are practicing therapists in my group, and they would say, this is not the standard. They have a tricky position too, because they practice and they have their ethics, and then Dr. Rosen has ethics that are different than most people's, and that's a hard thing to navigate. But when the book came out and I started talking to lots of therapists, one-on-one or in different groups, they would start to tell me this, and this, this is not normal. And some of them had a lot of rage, and I understood that to be fear. It's scary to have that experience of, okay. What I would say to somebody is that by and large, I think that group therapy in general is run a lot more gently and probably quietly, more quietly than we are in Rosenland, screaming and knocking flower pots around. And it really is the hardcore ethos that comes from Dr. Rosen is get your feelings out, celebrate them, stop treating feelings like they're going to kill you or that they're not welcome. And so you've got a room full of people who've been repressed for 3, 4, 5 decades. It's gonna get really messy. And if you're shopping for a group therapist, you can ask questions about what are the boundaries around confidentiality. Most group therapists have a convention that you're not allowed to take anything outside the room. Obviously, that's not what he's got people marrying each other. So, but the norm, it's not legal, but it's a norm. Most people, you can't take anything outside the room, and you can't have contact outside of the room with your group mate. That's very common. And another one is that in some places, in order to enforce the norms of the group, people sign contracts before they enter the group to honor these boundaries. And they're well thought out and they make sense. And Dr. Rosen has just chosen a different path based on his understanding of addiction, people who suffer from addiction, what that kind of secrecy and that boundary may not serve the people he serves as well.
Yeah. And someone asked in the chat if groups still exist, and if it does, what form has it taken since the publication of the book?
It definitely still exists. We do now. We mostly go in person now, which is a huge blessing because we were online. And as everybody knows, it's a great to have it online, but it's so much better to have bodies and people in person, which is a really I feel like I'll never take that for granted again. So we're still going, and we don't talk about the book very often. It sort of has just been so woven into the fabric of the memory of the group. Like, it's like, oh, so and so's divorced. Oh, Christie wrote a book. Oh, it's like it's just part of the stream of the life of the group. And so it for a while it had such a front row seat that I'm sure it was so annoying. Like, if I had been a member of the group and I'm trying to come in and talk about my kids or my divorce, and here comes Christie talking about her book again, it would have been very hard to sit through that. So I'm really grateful that my group really supported the work that I had to do on the page and off the page to really participate in the joy in the publication of the book.
Yeah. You know, I've several questions, both for me and that people have sent in about, I'll say them one by one rather than throwing them all at you at once. You know, a lot of people in this book club are graduate students of different kinds. And I think by and large, and I don't want to make a blanket statement, but graduate school can be strange and can be isolating even when you're in a big law class or med school or something like that. And I hear both among people I know and among clients and people who reach out to me, through the book club or Instagram. I think I want to go to therapy, but I'm a busy grad student and I don't think I have the time. It's easy for me to talk about why it's important to make the time, but I'm kind of biased because this is what I do for a living. And I'm wondering if you could comment on what, amidst being a law student, which is busy enough and hectic enough and stressful enough as it is, what would you say to people who feel like it's grad school is too busy or whatever is going on in my life is too busy, I can make the time later?
Right. I hear that a lot too. And what I know to be true is I thought graduate school, law school was super, super busy. And then I became a lawyer and I was like, oh, now I have a boss and a paycheck and an expense report and a dry cleaning bill. And I just got busier. And what I came to believe, like for me, the truth is I would not have gone to therapy as a law student if I didn't feel the peril around my neck. If it hadn't escalated to suicidal, just if I could just bury myself in my books and achievement, I would have done it. But there was a still small voice inside of me, even before the suicidal ideation, that was just like, when are you going to do the work? Like, when are you?
Yeah.
You can do it at 28. You could, if you survive, you can do it at 38. You could drag this into your marriage. I knew I wasn't going to have a marriage without lots of work and treatment. I believe that to my bones, and it turned out to be true. And I had the benefit of having been in 12-step recovery. I saw people who started the work later than I did. I was lucky to get in recovery for bulimia at 19. That's incredibly young to get into 12-step recovery. And I had a little bit of muscle memory of knowing that it's really, when I was saying I don't have time, what I was really saying is I'm scared to do the work. And if I'm scared to do the work, there'll never be enough time. But on the flip side, if I'm ready to do the work, then I'll make the time. So it's really for me, it really came down to fear. And did I want to live and be free and begin to like untangle the mess that was like, I knew it was there. And I just got ready because I got into enough pain.
Yeah. And I think that's such an important point, that life is busy, and even if it feels really busy right now, that doesn't mean it's going to be less busy in the future. And talking about knowing that it was the time to do it. For you, it had gotten to a point in which you were in dire need for help. And often I tell people that the time to start therapy is before you need it. Can you comment on, in retrospect, and obviously hindsight is 2020, but when would you have known that it was a good time to go to therapy if you had had the insight that you have now?
I think if I knew then what I know now, I'm a person who could have gone to treatment in high school. When I was 19, when I was 18, 17, I would drop the pin at 17. I was exhibiting really careless behavior around. I mean, I was super raging bulimic. I was totally withdrawn. I got involved in my very first relationship that was sexual was with a raging alcoholic. All the writing was on the wall. Everything that was coming toward me in my future was written into my 17-year-old days. And there was a young girl in my high school who did go to treatment, and I remember thinking, we're the same. Like, we're this. And she's actually the person who, when I fast forward to when I was 19 and a sophomore in college, she had an alcohol problem, and she told me, there's a 12-step program for eating, which I didn't even know. And so I do think, and I have heard a statistic that people who seek treatment, on average, they could have sought treatment average of 6 years before they actually ask for help. So we're really bad at getting this upstream like treatment to forestall years of pain and agony.
Yeah. And I think, it can be scary. It can be scary admitting you need help. It can be scary confiding in a stranger, or if you're in a group with a group of strangers. It can be scary articulating things that you've never articulated before. But, I often tell people, if you're wondering if therapy would be helpful, the answer is that you should probably give it a try.
Yeah, I agree with that. So it is scary. I mean, I would never tell anyone it's not scary. And I don't tell people that they should go to group. In my heart, I believe it is an amazing tool that I wish more people knew about. I wish people knew just that if you have a certain set of issues. And the reason why I went to group isn't because I had read a treatise and discovered it was great for interpersonal. I had no money. I was a law student, and group was 1/3 the price of individual.
Yeah.
That was already, I had to get extra loans to pay for it. So I don't ever want to have the conversation and act like money is not a barrier. I had to jump through I was lucky I was able to jump through hoops, but if somebody, or I'll just say, talked about myself, I had all this resistance, time, money, fear. You have to walk through a lot to get to that first appointment, to get yourself in the chair before someone who's just going to stare at you and want to know what your story is.
Yeah. And I think it's, so true too, that group, I think people know that group therapy exists, but don't often consider it as a viable option. And right now we're in, it's a mental health crisis, to say the least, with so much demand, largely the aftermath of the height of COVID, but also because mental health is prevalent, and people are struggling, and therapy is expensive, and it's hard to find available therapists, and it's hard to know what to look for. And I have taken up helping people find therapists, particularly people who have never been to therapy, don't know what kind of therapy they might need, and don't know where to look. And I'm constantly telling people group therapy is an option. Participating in therapy for a research study is an option. They're going to a training center for like a PhD program in which students are, these are all options. And I think that in some ways they feel more accessible or more affordable because of what they are, but there also are real benefits to it. For someone thinking, okay, so group therapy might be cheaper, but what else are the benefits? What would you say to them versus individual therapy?
Yeah. What I loved about what I love to this day about group therapy is, you know, especially when I started, I was really, really needy. And I mean, I was super shut down, but once I started to blossom and wake up through a couple of sessions or a couple of months, then I was like, oh, I need help. I'm allowed to ask for help. Well, your therapist, my therapist, Dr. Rosen, was one person, but now I sit in a circle with 6 other people, and model, I was encouraged to call them and to have them help me during the week. Like early on, before I'd made any connections with my group mates, it would feel like those 6 days while I'm waiting for the next session, I'd just be holding my breath like, oh my God, I got to get a group. I have so much to talk about. Oh my God, all these things happened. And I was such a ball of anxiety and I was starting to wake up. So my nerves were tingling and I didn't know what to do with all of that.
Yeah.
And very brilliantly, Dr. Rosen, he gave me suggestions. He calls them prescriptions, like call Rory every night and tell her about your food. Call Marty and tell him about your ask him for an affirmation. So I was making these connections and I went into therapy. If I had to boil down what was most wrong with me is I was terribly, terribly lonely and afraid of people. And I didn't know how to get closer. And you can't solve the loneliness problem without other people. Um, and I was just terrified. So what group did is I learned how to be a friend. I learned how to show up. I learned how to listen. I learned how to be a witness. And I learned how to be myself in a chair with other people holding me. And those were skills that I wouldn't have called them that at the time, but looking back, those were skills I could take back to law school and to meetings and to my college friends and begin to put a life together. And that's how the bridges are made. I had no idea how people had friends and boyfriends. I really didn't know. It sounds crazy, but I learned that in group. And the other thing I would say, and I hope this comes through in the book, group is really, really fun. It is fun. People don't like the main objection I hear is, why do I want to go and listen to other people's problems? I can certainly appreciate that, but getting to know other people and following week by week, it is better than anything I've ever seen on TV. It's a party in there a lot of the time. And we're doing very serious work, but it's jovial, it's convivial, it's wild. Like that's to me is what I was always seeking and didn't know how to get.
Yeah.
And that's and oh, the other thing I would say, I am a person who struggles with people pleasing. And, when I would sit one-on-one with the therapist, which I did a little bit before I joined group, I was always performing. I was trying to get the therapist to fall in love with me, a man, or think I was this or think I was that. And in group, there's something about like other people are there. I don't have to work so hard. I don't have to entertain Dr. Rosen. There's 6 other people here with sex lives and money problems. And I more quickly was able to let down my guard and not have to be performing girl, da 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 da, tap dance for daddy. I let that go sooner than I would have or that I did when I was an individual.
Yeah. And I think too, I imagine that even if someone is coming in with a vastly different issue or, whatever they're coming to speak about, that there's something that can feel really unifying about it. And that ultimately, at the end of the day, if people are looking for connection, no matter what they're expressing, they're struggling with in that moment, there's a lot of common ground there. And so I imagine that you learn a lot about yourself. You said you learned how to be a friend, but even by hearing other people's problems, I'm sure to some degree it made you more aware of what you were feeling too.
Yeah, it's actually something magical that I don't quite know how to articulate, but you're exactly right. There's someone who sits across the circle from me. He's an immigrant, and I have no idea what that feels like. And yet, when he talks, when he gets to the soul of it, I can totally relate. I can join him in his distress or anxiety. And there's someone in our group who just lost her husband, also not an experience I've ever had. And I love her and I want to witness and be supportive for her. But when she talks about her grief and her loss, I feel that myself. I haven't had that particular loss. I have had loss, and it's incredible. It's this type of energy that gets transmitted during a session when somebody's doing the work. It's incredible. I can't even explain how it serves me when I go out into the world, when I interact with my husband, or I just, it changes. It has changed. I feel like it's changed the molecules in my body to sit with other people as they're doing their work.
Yeah. No, it sounds really poetic in a way, or in many ways, really, not just in one way. There was one part of the book, particularly, that probably if you were to guess the parts that would just stand out to me above all else, I don't even know if you would guess this, but it spoke to me largely because it is something that people come and talk to me about all the time. And so I'm going to read it, just a paragraph. And so it is around the part in which you are ending things with Jeremy.
Mm.
The paragraph says, "In my frenzy, I remained deaf to the one need he had expressed, to be left alone. Today, I have compassion for him and the illness that robbed him of joy and energy. I also have compassion for myself as his ex-girlfriend who thought she could cure his malaise with new linens and fresh pineapple. At the time, all I could manage was scrambling harder to fix him by fashioning him into the man I wanted him to be."
Ooh.
Yes,
Yes.
you wrote it and you can't believe how strong it is.
I remember pulling this comforter out at Jeremy's house and like just like tidying it like I was his mother or his like governess or something. It was such a disconnect, and I was just so trying so hard to make him different, to make myself different. And one thing I discovered about as I was writing group, I felt so much love and gratitude for all the men in the book. And at the time, I was furious. I could bend your ear about Jeremy and Jeremy this and Jeremy that, and he doesn't. And I was such a victim. The beautiful thing about writing the book is I realized we were in a dance and we came together for and we learned what we could, and I could see clearly. I just want to wrap young Christie and young Jeremy like in a hug and just say, "Oh, you're trying so hard." Like
Yeah,
it's so hard to be young and not know your efforts are going in the wrong direction.
yeah. So, I mean, the I think something I hear all the time, people reaching out to me and saying, my significant other or my parent or my sibling or my best friend is really struggling right now, and I'm trying to do everything I can to make it better, and I just don't know what to do anymore. And I think, what struck me so much about this paragraph is your ability in retrospect to have compassion for him, but also to realize that there's perhaps um, nothing that you could have done.
Yeah.
And was wondering if you could, and I don't mean to make you representative of the voice of reason, to everyone who's experienced this, but what you would say to people who feel this kind of frustration about feeling like they can't fix someone.
Yeah, well, honestly, the first thing I would say is there alcoholism in your past? Maybe you should try Al-Anon. That's also pretty cheap. It's free if you are unable to contribute. But I do think that for me, letting go of other people, and the hooks I get hooked into other people and their malaise, their addiction. Really, it's addiction. What Jeremy had, or he had mental illness. He was super, super depressed, and he wasn't dealing with a lot of things from his past and present. And never mind, I had just started my career job, and I think that the only way for me to sort of put the focus back on myself, it takes other people. I can't do it by myself. I needed help from my therapy group. I had to join a new 12-step program to help me look at my own look at my own relationship to people, other people's chaos. But for the most part, even if you're not into like signing up for some big thing, if there's someone in your life that you trust that you could start to tell them, because my experience, how those relationships fester for me is I don't tell anybody. I don't tell anyone, well, his cat pooped or puked in the middle of the living room and it's been there for 2 weeks. Do you think he's okay? And
Right.
I had friends who could say to me, that doesn't sound okay. This relationship doesn't sound good. But if no one's going to be able to ask you those questions if you don't expose yourself and start to say a little bit about what's going on. So I think letting other people in is the best thing you can do for yourself, as scary as it is. It is not an easy thing. It's simple but not easy.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, just I don't want to overlook it. Someone put in the chat that they thought it was really beautiful how writing the book has changed your perspective.
Yeah. I
And
feel I didn't know that was going to happen at all. It's like there are so many incredible byproducts of putting a memoir into the world, or just writing one. Before it went out into the world, I was like, oh, Christie and Jeremy in 2003. Oh, you two little pumpkins.
and on a related note, in you know research has shown that writing, whether that's journaling or creative writing or whatever it is, can be a really powerful tool for mental health, um, or for coping with anything in general. What do you think the different steps of writing this book had on you? Going from first writing a novel that was pretty clearly parallel to your life, then to transferring it over to writing a memoir, then to getting it published and having people read it. I'm wondering if you could speak about the power of writing at each of those different stages.
Yeah, I would say at each stage there was a different level of shame that I had to sort of confront and walk through. And at the beginning, it was, oh, well, I can't write a book. I can't write a true story because I'm a nobody. Memoirs are for Celine Dion or someone who's been through something super, super, super crazy. Like they were kidnapped and famously kidnapped. So I had to get through the shame of like, I'm an ordinary woman who had an ordinary, I think at the end of the day, it was like, I was an ordinary woman who had an experience of transformation. And then once I got to writing, I had a lot of shame I had to confront about, am I allowed to tell these stories? Anybody who writes nonfiction, creative nonfiction memoir, there's a lot to unpack around who do I get to write about? What do I get to say? How do we protect other people's privacy? I had to work through all my ethics. And as a side note, I grew up in a family that did not believe in therapy and did
Right.
not and telling people your business.
Right.
So I wrote a memoir about going to therapy. That part, I knew intellectually I had the right to tell my story of my transformation and offer it to the world. But that's different than how my nervous system imagines what in the hell is my mom going to say when she finds out I'm in group with this crazy person and I've been there since '01, no plans to leave. And I'm going to talk about my sex life, my pinworm, my masturbation, what in the world. So that was a huge mountain to climb. And then there was, once it got rolling, then there was, well, is the writing any good? Is the arc there? And there was at every step of the way. I think I probably just have a lens of life that measures shame. Like, which shame was I dealing with back in 2004? So I think that the real putting it out into the world gave me an opportunity to peel back so many layers of shame and secret. And am I entitled to my voice? Every woman writer I know has this, many men too, but women identifying writers struggle with, do I have a right to tell this story? Who am
Yeah.
I to hurt? And is that something that's my business, or is that just a codependent fear that I need to overcome myself with my people?
Yeah. And was there any point in which you didn't feel the shame? anymore?
That is a great question. You know what's interesting is essentially the answer is no. It's like it's a little bit like whack-a-mole. Like what's
Yeah.
interesting now, like I get the call from my editor, like Reese Witherspoon has picked your book, and I was like, just screaming bloody murder. I was like, what? Reese Witherspoon picked a book about dirty dicks? What? I couldn't believe it, and I was like, I was beyond over the moon. Like that's a complete career changer, and I even
Yeah.
knew it at the time. And then when it came out, I've had waves. I have had freedom from the shame. Yes, I have. And the shame always comes back. It's like I would feel shame like, oh God, does this book help the world? Does this book contribute to these urgent conversations about social justice, or does this book liberate anyone? And that's not for me to say. It's really not for, I don't know what my book can go and do. And I would have waves of it like, oh, it's not literary enough. I'm not like Tara Westover or Kiesi Lehman, like my heroes, or Lydia Yuknovich. And then I was like, I have to get over myself because I'm me and I wrote my story. What I am observing now, I have a new book that's coming out in February, and most of my shame now has like gravitated over there. So I'm like, oh, group is just so cute. I love group. Like I have no issues with group because every bit of the neurosis has like attached to the new book. So
Yeah.
it's given me like this really wonderful, like sublime, blissful state with group. So it seems like it's gonna be never ending.
What can you tell us about the new book?
Yeah, so the new book is coming out in February, say with Avid Reader Press, and it's the story of my relationships with my female friends. And one of my, it's not a regret, but an untold story throughout group is because I was so focused. It's true. I was so focused on where's my husband, where's my family? Oh my God, I want to have sex. What's wrong with me? That consumed my life and it consumed my therapy. And that's why the story goes the way it does. But
Yeah.
as soon as I got engaged, like literally the week I got engaged, all of a sudden I thought that was going to cure everything. It's so naive and it's such a product of like princess culture, and it's embarrassing, but I really
Yeah.
did think I have arrived. I'm like all my friends, and I went out to dinner with some friends, and they were all there. They were like one step ahead of me in like life
Yeah.
system. You know, they were all having babies, and they were super kind and loving to me. But like, who cares about an engagement when people are having babies? It's like a different. I've been there, done that, and I realized I had so much work to do around friendships, competition, jealousy, scarcity. And when I looked at that, I was like, I think this is a story. And so BFF it's called BFF, and it's coming out. And I'm kind of excited to show my mom. So I'm like, there's no sex in this book. None. So it's not very sexy, but it's like the flip side of what was going on with all the boys. It's how I got straight with the ladies.
And are any, I hesitate to call them characters because they're real people, but are any of the names that we know in group going to show up in BFF as well?
They are. There's one scene, or there's like two scenes where I'm in group, and I was trying really hard not to take readers back to group because we've all went to group, right? But there was just integral parts of the story that I just had to. So there's Dr. Rosen makes some cameos and a few of the group mates, and there's a few Easter eggs in there for anyone who's read group. You'll recognize some of the people, of course.
Going back to something you said earlier about this, am I making a contribution by writing group? I think that one thing that I think is really incredible, especially amidst, like I said, this mental health crisis that we're going through right now, is that slowly but surely people are becoming more open about the idea of going to therapy. That, um, thinking back to, for example, when I started graduate school, and I did graduate school um, in what I would call a southern part of the country, although I was in Charlottesville, Virginia, so they would not say that it's southern, and both friends that I had from before graduate school and clients I saw in Virginia didn't want to talk about going to therapy to anyone else. And there seems to have been just a real emergence of people talking about it, and now I feel like most of my friends or, people I run into openly talk about, oh, I go to therapy on Tuesdays, or, oh, I when I moved here, the first thing I did was look for a new therapist. And it's, to me, just a really beautiful thing because it normalizes this idea that you don't have to have something wrong with you to go to therapy. And, I have had several conversations with different friends who say to them that when looking for a dating partner, for example, that someone who goes to therapy, who has gone to therapy, is now, a big turn on for them. And I think that, if nothing else, and there definitely is so much more, that this is a beautiful display of the power of talking about going to therapy and being able to realize that there's nothing wrong with it. And despite the shame that I think a lot of people feel in different areas of their life, that there's nothing to be ashamed by 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 saying that you want help. And I really thank you for that because I think that it's a really important representation in something that society is making progress
Yeah.
on. They'll have a very, very long way to go in that.
Yeah, thank you. And I heard Dr. Nina Vassen, we did an event together, and she was telling us that the top 3 reasons why people do not seek therapy is stigma, stigma, and stigma, which to me, I live in a therapy bubble. A lot of my friends see my therapist. So
Yeah.
I really, really had lost touch with the idea. I was like, stigma? There's no stigma, because it's like all I talk about. But the truth is, there is stigma still out there. And what I've noticed, even since maybe the pandemic spurred this along, like you said, but I'm hearing a lot more celebrities talk about it, talk about long-term therapy. Like I heard Jeff Howe, he's had the same therapist for 20 years, or LeBron James was talking about when he was transitioning from the NBA to civilian life, he was like, oh, the first thing I did was get a therapist. And every time someone normalizes that, it makes it that easier for someone to get help down the road who's heard that and internalized that. And I just think adding to the conversation, I care less about whether people go to group than I do about, can we have these conversations? Can we talk tools? Can we offer the tools to people who need them before they are at a crisis point? That's what I really care about.
Yeah. No, I think that that's so important. I wanted to open it up and see if anyone who is on here right now wants to add in any questions besides the ones that have already been sent in. I'll give it a minute to see if anyone has any. Guess maybe not, but I'll see. I have a couple more questions if you have just a few more minutes.
Sure.
I'm wondering too if you can speak a little bit about, if you're comfortable with it, your relationship with your mother. Um, um,
Yes. Doesn't have Instagram.
because I know for a lot of people, they're maybe more comfortable telling a stranger I go to therapy, but it's the people who they think that they're the closest to, or they think they should be the closest to, that they're the most worried about letting in.
Yes, 100%. If Sharon in Dayton knows I go to therapy, who cares? But if my mother in Dallas knows that I go to therapy, it feels like that's just way more complicated. And what I would say about that is it took me publishing a book about therapy to be honest. And I didn't even, I mean, just if you hand your mom a book you wrote, does that count as telling your mom you go to therapy? I don't know. We can debate that. But one of the things, the coolest thing that I realized on the back end of that was my understanding from our conversation was that it was very painful to read the things that had happened to me, that I had done to my body and had done to me. It was very painful. She didn't know all of that stuff and that I had slogged through all this therapy. And so we got to have a conversation about it, which I was grateful for. And then on the back end, I did not know how free I would feel. Like,
Yeah.
I don't have to carry the burden of secrecy or privacy, in that I don't have to carry it the way I don't need her to go to therapy or write a book about it, but I do need to do those things. And
Yeah.
I only by having the conversations and risking the uncomfortable feelings was I able to separate out what she needed and what I needed, and just be okay. We need different things. And that doesn't make anybody wrong. Nobody has to convince anybody. That part was really amazing. And what used to happen before the book came out, my parents would come to visit, and I would like sneak off on, on group time. I'd be like, I'm going to the dry cleaner, and I would come back 3 later. Or I would just be very vague. I'm going to a doctor's appointment. Now, I don't have to tell anyone my business. I certainly, if my parents weren't like, where are you going? And I would just make this elaborate, I'm going to the eye doctor. I was going to group. And now I don't have to do that. I'm just like,
Yeah.
I'll be back at 9, and they don't care. So there's something about breaking through like years of silence and shame that freed all of us. It freed
Yeah.
all. While my parents aren't like, how's old Dr. Rosen? What's that? What you working
Right.
on? They don't, that would be sort of a weird boundary violation. But now I can look them in the eye and tell them where I'm going. And part of me wishes I would have done that a little bit sooner, just been like more frank, but I didn't know how to do it. I had to write a book to do that.
Yeah.
So it's been messy, but I'm glad for the process that taught me I don't have to carry my mother's rules, or
Yeah.
I don't have to carry my mother's boundaries. I have my
Yeah.
own. And that's what I'm supposed to have my own, and she's supposed to have her own. And that's been really healthy.
Yeah. No, I think that's a really important lesson, and one that a lot of people can take away, even if they haven't written a book, that you don't need to carry, for a lot of people, it's their mother, it could be their father, it could be, a significant other, that you don't need to carry someone else's boundaries.
Totally.
Someone said that they don't have a question, but they just read your book while they were in Ireland for the last 2 weeks. And it was exactly what they needed to read at the exact time that they needed to read it, and wanted to thank you.
Oh, I love that. My ancestors are from Ireland, so that's a wonderful, beautiful thing. Thank you for sharing.
And I don't want to keep you too long, but someone else asked, what are you most proud of with your new book? So I guess BFF, but also, we've talked about shame. So if there's anything you're particularly proud of with group 2, I would love to hear either or both of those.
Yeah, I would say that when I get still and quiet and put down all the noise about, is it going to be good? Will people like it? La la la. When I put that aside and get very still and quiet, what I'm most proud of is the relationships that have come out of the both of the books. The relationships I have with my editor and the team of people who have taken my words that I sent in a document to them and turned it into a book. It maybe because I came to writing later in life, I'm a bit of a late bloomer. I don't take any of that for granted. I'm still astounded. Like, they send me a galley, and I'm like, oh my God. And all the hands that have touched it with care and with love and precision and business mind. So I think, and both of my books are all about relationships, the messy, brutal, transformative power of relationships. And I can't imagine, first of all, I can't imagine about writing anything else. I don't even know that I could do it, but I am proud of myself for having set up a life that I have enough support that I can be a writer that people call raw and brave.
Yeah.
I could not do that without the scaffolding that is comprised of other people's hearts and bodies cheering me on, holding my hair back while I, sweat it out. So I think it's the relationships both that are depicted on the pages and the relationships that take the pages out to the world. Like, that never ceases to just strike me with awe. Like I like stop in my steps. Like I can't believe like I can call someone in New York who's taking care of my book and say, "What do you think about this?" And they'll call me back. It's like it's a
Yeah.
wonderful thing.
Yeah. And someone else chimed in saying that they loved group and they're looking forward to reading BFF, which I think is a sentiment that a lot of us are feeling. And I got several messages from people saying that they couldn't attend this live, but that they loved the book and they looked forward to being able to watch the discussion because they so loved reading the book. And I just wanted to thank you again so much for taking the time to do this. And one thing that I like to end every book club with is asking if there's anything that either you're reading right now or you've read recently that you would recommend that people check out.
Yes. Oh my gosh. I'm reading an amazing memoir. It's called Kin, Kin. Bloomsbury's the publisher. The writer is Shauna K. Rodenberg. And it's
Okay.
an incredible, incredible memoir about this woman who grew up in Kentucky and a little bit in Minnesota, and just all the stereotypes we have about Kentucky and Appalachia and
That's,
mountain. It's so tender-hearted and harrowing, and I cannot put it down. My kids are like asking me for help with their homework. I'm like, hold on, mommy's reading. And I'm really, really loving it. It's so beautiful. And that's really, really gripped me. And wait, can I say one more thing about group therapy?
yes, please say whatever you want.
I always think, and whenever I talk to people or groups, I'm always like, from the patient perspective, obviously, 'cause that's the only thing I could say. But I also, now that I know a lot of therapists, like from all stages of my life, they're all incredibly busy and burned out, and their voicemails are full, and they're not taking new patients. And as someone who has, I've sought mental health treatment for a family member, and it took me a long time to find someone to even call me back.
Yeah.
Nothing of making an appointment. But one thing I would say to therapists in training is consider running groups. You'll have 8 patients at once. You'll roll in the dough. I'm sure you'll help people, but like, let's just be practical. That's 90 minutes. Call it 90 minutes. Run a 75-minute group. I don't care. Put 8 in there and let the good times roll. Like, it seems to me like I believe in it as a patient, but as a therapist, it seems like a pretty efficient way to reach a lot of people and to also guard your sanity and your burden. That feels like I'm super overstepping telling therapists what to do, but I'm like, it's good for y'all too.
No, and I don't need to get into commentary on training and education within, I think that it's, someone saying that it's so difficult to find a therapist that matches with your needs, which is 100% true. And for anyone who has tried one therapist and it wasn't a good fit and feels discouraged about going to therapy, I'm totally interrupting myself, but yes, fit of therapist is very important. And I say it's just like shoes. If the first one doesn't feel comfortable, keep trying them on until you find one that fits, because it's not a one size fits all model.
Yeah, for sure.
But yes, I agree. Group therapy is not widely enough available, and perhaps people don't have the confidence because during school they don't get a lot of that experience, but that exposure on both the therapist side and on the patient side, I think is really incredible.
Yeah. Thank you for letting me get on my soapbox. Also, there should be more therapists for kids.
I agree. Look, you're preaching to the choir here. 100%. And if anyone on here, just to reiterate, is looking for a therapist, I'm happy for no cost, no anything. You can send me a message and I'm happy to talk to you about what you might need and try to help you find a therapist. Someone else says that she'd love to join group.
I love to hear that. I love that.
And if anyone, I don't know how, but if anyone happened to get onto this Instagram live without knowing what they were getting on, just wanted to state that I am a psychologist and run a monthly virtual well-being book club in which we read books written both from the perspective of of patients and therapists and people from all sorts of things, and they're not all about therapy. They're not self-help books. They're about humans and what it's like to be a human and navigate relationships and boundaries and therapy and everything related to that. So thank you so much. I so appreciate your giving us the time, and your book was really terrific, and I can't wait for BFF to come out.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you so much for the work you do for readers, for therapists, for people who are listening. It's truly, truly awesome, and I'm so happy to be a part of it. So thank you.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Yeah, you too.
Bye-bye.